The chandelier above the Huajin Grand Ballroom held 9,000 pieces of imported Austrian crystal, and Kang Seoyeon could see her own reflection in every single one of them. 9,000 versions of a woman in a champagne silk gown,
I must
standing
ensure
on a
everything is
polished obsidian
perfect.
floor,
Just
3
relax,
hours
my
away
dear.
from
It's
being
almost
publicly
time.
introduced
I
as the
can't.
future
It's too
Madame Kang
important.
of the most feared empire in Seoul. 3 hours. That was the number written on the silver placard near the entrance. Engagement Reaffirmation Gala. 7 p.m. A second public ceremony, demanded by Madame Kang herself, to repair the rumors that had been circulating for months about the marriage cracking from the inside. The press would be there. The ministers would be there. The three rival families who had been waiting decades for a single visible weakness in the Kang dynasty would be there, watching. And Seoyeon was supposed to smile. She was running her gloved fingers along the seating chart when her phone buzzed against the marble table. A message. From a number she did not recognize. The kind of unknown number a woman in her position learned to ignore. Except this one had an attachment, and the preview was a photograph, and the photograph was of her husband. Junho was sitting in the back of a black sedan she recognized immediately. His tie was loosened. His jaw was tilted towards someone whose face was just outside the frame, and his expression, that rare, unguarded expression he had given her exactly twice in 3 years of marriage, was directed at a woman wearing the Kang family heirloom pearl bracelet. The bracelet Madame Kang had publicly promised to Seoyeon at this exact gala. Tonight, in 2 hours and 58 minutes, a second message arrived. She'll be wearing it on her wrist when he announces the annulment. Check the gala program. Page 9. Seoyeon walked across the empty ballroom on heels that did not make a sound. The program was already printed, already stacked beside the orchids in gold-trimmed folders. She opened one. Page 9 listed an edition that had not been there when she approved the layout yesterday morning. A personal statement from Mr. Kang Junho, 7:42 p.m. Her own name had been removed from the closing remarks. She stood very still in the center of 9,000 reflections of herself. She did not cry. She did not gasp. She did what she had spent 3 years inside that family training herself never to do in public. She calculated the bracelet, the sedan, the woman, the statement, the press, the 3 rival families, the mother-in-law who had spent 36 months trying to remove her by every legal channel and had finally, tonight, chosen humiliation instead. In 2 hours and 56 minutes, Kang Junho was going to stand on the stage, built for their reaffirmation, and use it to discard her in front of every important name in the country. Seoyeon closed the program. She set it back on top of the stack, perfectly aligned, exactly the way she had found it. She walked to the floor-length mirror beside the orchid arrangement, and she looked at the woman in the champagne silk, and she made the only decision left to make. If they wanted a public ceremony, they would get one. Just not the one they had written. She picked up her clutch, smiled at the bewildered florist who asked if everything was in order, and said, "Everything is exactly where it needs to be." Then she walked out of the Huajin Grand Ballroom and into the most dangerous 2 hours of her life. If you love intense stories of betrayal, dangerous romance, and the kind of comeback that rearranges an entire empire, you are exactly where you belong. This is Aurora Love Saga, where every woman who was thrown away comes back as the architect of the room. Tap subscribe, hit that like button, and tell me in the comments, what would you have done in those 2 hours and 56 minutes? Stay with me. The chandelier hasn't even started falling yet. The driver who picked her up at the service entrance of the Huajin was not her usual driver. Seoyeon noticed it the moment she opened the door and saw the man's hands on the wheel. too still, too disciplined, the knuckles of someone who had been trained to hold a steering wheel the way other men held a weapon. "Madame Kang sent me," he said without turning around. "She wishes for you to arrive at the gala from the family residence, to present a more unified image." Seo Yeon slid into the back seat. She did not argue. She did not ask questions she already knew the answers to. Madame Kang wanted her at the mansion 2 hours early so the optics of the evening could be controlled. So Seo Yeon could be seen leaving the family home on her husband's arm, exactly 20 minutes before he stood up and dismantled her in front of the country. It was an elegant cruelty. Seo Yeon respected it the way one respects a blade held by an enemy who knows how to use it. "Take the river road," she said quietly. The driver hesitated. Madame Kang requested the bridge route. "I know what Madame Kang requested. Take the river road." There was a pause, long enough to be insulting, and then the car turned. She used those 7 extra minutes to make 3 phone calls. The first was to an accountant named Im Tae-suk, a man who had been quietly removed from a Kang subsidiary 19 months ago for asking the wrong question about a wire transfer to a shell company in Jeju. Seo Yeon had memorized his name from a single document she had seen on Junho's desk one night when he had fallen asleep before locking his study. She had reached out to Im Tae-suk 6 weeks ago through a third party with a single sentence. "I know what they did to you, and I know what they're still doing." He had agreed to meet her once. She had not asked him for anything that day. She had only listened. Tonight, she asked him for one thing. "Send it," she said. "All of it? All of it. Tonight, the moment my husband stands up at that podium." "Madame Kang." "Send it to the prosecutor's office, to the Financial Crimes Division, to the 3 journalists on the list I gave you. Not before, not after. The moment he stands up." Im Tae-suk was quiet for a long second. "You understand what this does to him. I understand what he did to me." She ended the call. The second call was to a woman named Prosecutor Han Mi-rae, the only public official in Seoul who had spent the last 4 years trying to indict the Kang Empire and had been blocked at every turn. Seo Yeon had never met her face to face. They had communicated for 8 months through a series of meticulously anonymous channels. Prosecutor Han had no idea who her source was. She knew only that the information was accurate, devastating, and unfalsifiable. Tonight, Seo Yeon used her real voice for the first time. "My name is Kang Seo Yeon," she said. "I am the wife of Kang Jun-ho. In approximately 90 minutes, a document package will arrive at your office. I am the source. I have always been the source. When you are ready to act on it, you will not need to protect my identity any longer." Prosecutor Han did not speak for a long moment. "Why tonight?" "Because tonight, he was going to use a stage to erase me. I have decided to use the same stage to introduce myself." The third call lasted 12 seconds. She did not say her name. She said only an address, a time, and the words, "Bring the bracelet." Then she ended the call, slid the phone back into her clutch, and watched Seoul move past the window in long ribbons of light. The driver took the river road. She had known he would. Madame Kang's men were trained to obey, but they were also trained to recognize the voice of authority. Tonight, Seo Yeon's voice had finally become the louder one. What none of them knew yet was that it had been the louder voice for almost a year. The Kang mansion sat above the river, like a fortress that had forgotten it was a home. Seo Yeon walked through its front gates exactly the way she always had, quietly, beautifully, without ever giving Madame Kang the satisfaction of a flinch. The old woman was waiting for her in the front drawing room. Madame Kang was 71 years old. She had buried 2 husbands, outmaneuvered 4 government investigations, and personally signed off on the deaths of 17 men whose names had never made the papers. She wore a midnight blue hanbok with silver embroidery, and she did not stand up when Seo Yan entered. "You're early," Madame Kang said. "I'm exactly on time." "For what?" Seo Yan smiled. It was the smile she had practiced in the mirror for 36 months, the one that revealed nothing and unsettled everyone. "For everything you've been planning, Mother." The word mother landed in the air between them like a coin dropped onto marble. Madame Kang's eyes narrowed by exactly half a degree. "Sit down, Seo Yan." "I'd rather stand." "You'd rather stand," Madame Kang repeated softly. 3 years in this house and you've finally learned the syntax of power? Pity it's too late to use it. Is it? The old woman set her teacup down. There was a precision to the gesture that had always reminded Seo Yan of a surgeon laying down an instrument. "Junho will speak at 7:42. By 8 o'clock, you will be on your way out of this family. Quietly, this time. We have prepared a settlement. It is generous. It will require your signature and your silence. If you give me both, you will leave with enough to live comfortably and disappear elegantly. If you do not, if I do not, then we will remember that you came into this family with nothing, and you will leave the same way." Seo Yan walked to the window. The Han River was the color of pewter in the early evening light. "Mother," she said, without turning around, "do you know what I did for the first 6 months after I married your son?" "I imagine you spent your money." "I read." "Read what?" "Everything. The household ledgers your daughter-in-law was expected to manage, the vendor contracts, the donation records to the political foundations, the personnel files of every staff member in this house, the correspondence between this family and the Huajin Group, the shipping manifests of the 3 companies your late husband registered in your maiden name." Madame Kang's teacup did not move, but the muscle along her jaw did. "I read for 6 months," Seo Yan continued, "and then I started writing. Not letters, not a diary, a map." "A map of what?" Seo Yan turned around at last. "Of every place this family is vulnerable, of every cousin who is 1 bad year away from betrayal, of every wire transfer that should never have been traceable but was, of every name in this country who has been waiting, very patiently, for an introduction to a person inside this house who could finally tell them the truth." "You are bluffing." "I am 31 years old, Mother. I have been bluffing in this house since the day I walked in. Tonight is the only night I am not." The drawing room was silent for a long moment. Madame Kang reached for her teacup, but her hand stopped halfway. She set it back without drinking. "What do you want, Seo Yan?" "I want you to attend the gala tonight." "That was always the plan." "I want you to sit in the front row. I want you to wear the pearl bracelet you promised me publicly 6 weeks ago. I want you to be photographed in it, and I want you to watch what happens when your son stands up at that podium." "You think you can stop him?" "I am not going to stop him. I want him to do exactly what he came to do." Seo Yan walked toward the door. "I want you to see who he becomes when he finishes." She paused with her hand on the doorframe. "And then, Mother, I want you to remember tonight as the last evening you ever told me what I would or would not do." She closed the door behind her with the same precision the old woman had used to set down her teacup. In the hallway, she allowed herself 1 breath. 1. Then she straightened her shoulders and walked back toward the foyer where the car was waiting to take her to the Huajin Grand Ballroom. There were 94 minutes left. The man standing in the shadow of the service corridor at the Huajin had no business being there. Hotel security had cleared the entire East Wing for the Kang Gala. Every entrance had been verified. Every guest had been checked against a list. And yet, here he was, in a charcoal three-piece suit, cut by a tailor, whose name Seo Yan recognized from the lining alone, watching the rear corridor as if he owned the building. He might have. Seo Yan was not sure yet. His name was Yoon Do-jin. He was 38 years old, the chief executive of a private holding group that had quietly acquired Huajin Hotels through a Singapore subsidiary 14 months ago. A fact that had not been disclosed publicly, and that almost nobody outside of 3 sealed boardrooms knew. Seo Yan was one of the 3. She had known for 9 months. She had been waiting for him to introduce himself for 9 months. He had been waiting for her to be ready. Tonight, both of them were finally on time. "Mrs. Kang," he said when she stopped in front of him. "Mr. Yoon? You're earlier than the schedule predicted. I made a few adjustments. I noticed." His eyes were the kind of dark that did not reflect light back. "The River Road, the phone call to Prosecutor Han, the conversation with your mother-in-law that ran 14 minutes longer than your usual visits. You've been busy. You've been watching. I've been doing what you asked me to do 9 months ago. Wait, and confirm." He stepped slightly out of the shadow. "Are we still waiting?" "No." "Then I have something for you." He held out a slim, black folder. She did not open it. "What is it?" "The final piece. The one I told you I would not deliver until the night you decided. It is a list of every person in your husband's organization who has agreed, in principle, to recognize you as the controlling interest of the restructured Kang Holdings, pending 2 conditions. The first is that your husband is removed from operational authority by external pressure rather than internal coup. The second is that your mother-in-law's stake in the foundation is legally invalidated. Tonight handles the first." "Yes." "And the second?" "The document I am about to hand to Prosecutor Han, simultaneously with your accountant's package, handles the second. Your mother-in-law's foundation was registered using a falsified seal in 1994. The original notary has been alive this entire time and has been waiting, quite patiently, for someone to ask him the right question." Seo Yan took the folder. "Why are you doing this, Mr. Yoon?" He almost smiled. It was the first and only time in their entire association that she would ever see him come close. "Because 11 years ago, your husband's family destroyed a man named Yoon Seok Cheol. He was my father. He was a small construction contractor in Busan who refused to launder money for the Kang subsidiaries. They took his business, they took his name, and they took his life within a single calendar year. I was 27. I was nobody. I have spent 11 years becoming somebody. And I am the instrument. No, Mrs. Kang, you are the architect. I am simply the man who recognized the architect when she walked into a room that everyone else mistook for a wife's drawing room." She looked at him for a long moment. "After tonight, Mr. Yoon, I will owe you something." "After tonight, Mrs. Kang, you will owe me nothing. We will, however, have a great deal to discuss." He stepped back into the shadow of the corridor. Seo Yan tucked the folder under her arm and walked toward the ballroom. There were 31 minutes left. The gala had filled. 320 guests in evening dress moved across the obsidian floor like figures in an expensive watch. The press pool had been cordoned to the left. The 3 rival families had been seated, deliberately, at the 3 points of a triangle that allowed each of them to observe the others. Madame Kang had taken her seat in the front row and had, exactly as Seo Yan had requested, fastened the pearl bracelet around her own thin wrist. The old woman's gaze did not leave Seo Yan for a single second. Junho was standing near the side stage with 2 of his lieutenants. He was 36 years old, exquisitely dressed, and visibly tense in a way only someone who had been married to him for 3 years would notice. He had not looked at Seo Yan when she entered. He had not looked at her when she took her seat at the family table. He was rehearsing, behind his eyes, the words he was about to use to end her. Seo Yan watched him calmly. There was no rage in her chest. There was no humiliation either. There was only the quiet, almost academic recognition of a man who believed, completely, that he was about to do something irreversible, and who had no idea that someone else had already done it. The master of ceremonies took the stage at 7:38. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, distinguished members of the press, please join me in welcoming, with great honor, the heir of the Kang family, Mr. Kang Jun-ho. The applause was disciplined. Jun-ho walked to the podium with the bearing of a man who had been born to be looked at. He adjusted the microphone. He smiled in a way Seo Yan had once, briefly, mistaken for affection. He began to speak. "Tonight," he said, "is a night for honesty." Seo Yan let her hands rest in her lap. "For too long," he continued, "this family has tolerated a private arrangement that no longer reflects who we are or what we represent. The marriage between myself and Miss Kang Seo Yan." He used her maiden name. He had already stripped her of his. "Was entered into under circumstances of personal misjudgment on my part. After careful reflection and with the support of my mother, I have decided to publicly—" He stopped. A waiter, near the back of the room, had paused to look at his phone. Then another. Then a journalist in the third row. Then a man in the front row whose face went the color of cold milk in less than 4 seconds. Phones were beginning to light up across the ballroom like fireflies waking at the wrong hour. Jun-ho frowned. He glanced at his own phone on the podium. He had set it there for the time, nothing else. The screen was dark. He looked up, confused, and saw 320 faces beginning, in waves, to turn toward him. Not in admiration, in something else. A second journalist stood up, then a third. The cordoned press pool, which had been instructed to remain seated until the conclusion of the announcement, was no longer seated. They were moving. Toward him. "Mr. Kang," one of them called out, microphone raised. "Can you confirm the documents released to the prosecutor's office in the last 6 minutes? Mr. Kang, are the wire transfer records authentic? Mr. Kang, is it true that your family foundation was registered under a falsified seal in? Mr. Kang, what is your response to the indictment notice from the Financial Crimes Division?" Jun-ho's hand closed around the edge of the podium. He looked, for the first time that evening, at the front row. At his mother, whose face had gone the same color as the man with the cold milk skin. At the pearl bracelet on her wrist, glittering in the chandelier light, photographed at that exact moment by 17 separate cameras. And finally, at his wife. Seo Yan was already standing. She walked, unhurried, toward the stage. The room parted around her the way rooms part around people who have just become inevitable. She climbed the 4 steps to the podium. She placed one gloved hand gently on her husband's arm. The same arm that had not reached for her on the night his mother first humiliated her at a family dinner 3 years ago. And she leaned toward the microphone. "Mr. Kang is unwell," she said in a voice that carried perfectly. "Please allow me to conclude his remarks on his behalf." He did not move. He could not. The cameras were on her now, every single one of them, and Jun-ho was a man who had spent his entire life understanding what cameras meant. "Tonight was meant to be a night of honesty," Seo Yan said. "On that, my husband and I agree. The documents that have just been delivered to the appropriate authorities are accurate. They were prepared, verified, and submitted by me. I have spent the last 23 months ensuring that every figure in them could withstand the scrutiny of any court in this country. A sound went through the room. It was not quite a gasp. It was the sound of 320 people simultaneously revising their understanding of who they had been standing next to. As of 9 minutes ago, she continued, the operational control of the Kang Holdings, including the 3 subsidiaries and the foundation, has been transferred to a restructured entity in which I am the controlling interest. This transfer has been recognized by the senior officers of the organization who were prepared to support such a restructuring and is being processed legally as we speak. She paused. She looked calmly at her mother-in-law. The pearl bracelet currently on Madame Kang's wrist was promised to me publicly 6 weeks ago, in front of 42 witnesses. I accept it. I will be collecting it after this gala concludes. Madame Kang's hand closed around her own wrist as if to hide it. It did not matter. The photographs already existed. Seo Yan turned finally to her husband. You came here tonight to end something, Junho. I came here tonight to begin something. I will let the public decide which of us understood this evening better. She stepped back from the microphone. Then she walked off the stage, down the 4 steps, through the parting crowd, and out of the Huajin Grand Ballroom, past the chandelier with its 9,000 crystals, each of which now held the reflection of a woman the room had completely failed to see for 3 years. The morning after a public execution is always quieter than people expect. Seo Yan sat in a glass-walled office on the 42nd floor of the building that had, until 96 hours ago, been registered to the Kang Group and was now registered to her. The sun came in low across the river. There was a single cup of barley tea on the desk in front of her. There was no celebration. There had not been a single one in 4 days. Yoon Do-jin walked in at exactly 9 o'clock. He set a folder down on the corner of her desk and remained standing. The prosecutor's office is moving faster than I anticipated, he said. Junho will be formally charged by the end of the week. The seal forgery case against your mother-in-law is being prepared separately. She has retained the best defense firm in the country. It will not be enough. And the foundation? Already in receivership. The 3 rival families have all, in the last 48 hours, requested meetings with you. I have declined on your behalf until next week. Good. He did not sit down. He never did, unless she explicitly invited him to. Mrs. Kang, you can stop calling me that. I will when you ask me to. She looked up. He was watching her with the careful, unreadable focus of a man who had spent 11 years learning how to wait for the right moment to do anything. She knew that look now. She had begun to recognize it as something specific to him, separate from the strategy, separate from the empire, separate from everything that had brought them into the same room. It unsettled her slightly. She did not let it show. Sit down, Mr. Yoon. He sat. I need to ask you something. Yes. 11 years is a long time to plan a single outcome. It is. You could have moved against the Kangs at any point in the last 4 years. You had the resources. You had the leverage. You had the personal grievance. Why did you wait for me? He was quiet for a moment. Outside, a barge moved slowly down the Han River. Because 11 years ago, he said, I promised my father something on the night he died. I promised him that I would not destroy the Kang family the way they destroyed him. I promised him that I would do it the way he would have done it if he had lived long enough to learn how. With patience, with precision, and with someone whose anger was honest. Why mine? Because the first time I saw a photograph of you, Mrs. Kang, you were standing slightly behind your husband at a charity event in Incheon. You were wearing a green dress. He was being congratulated by a man my father had once called a friend. And you were the only person in that photograph who was not smiling at the man. That is not a reason. It is not the reason. It is the moment I began to look for one. He met her eyes. I found it 6 months later, when I learned what you had been reading inside that house. I made my decision then. I have not revised it since. She did not respond immediately. The question every viewer might have been asking themselves at home was the same one she was asking herself in that quiet office above the river. When a woman has spent every drop of her strength on becoming free of one man, does she have anything left to give to another? When does revenge end and a life begin? And how does she know the difference? Tell me what you think in the comments. I want to know where you would draw the line. Mr. Yoon, she said at last. Yes. I am not going to give you an answer today. I did not come here for one. Good. She picked up the cup of barley tea. Because I have not finished yet. He inclined his head slightly. He stood up. He walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the frame, the same way she had paused in her mother-in-law's drawing room 4 days and a lifetime ago. There is one thing I should mention, he said. Yes? Your husband has requested a meeting. She looked up. Where? Here, in this building. He has asked for 1 hour, alone. No lawyers, no press. When? This afternoon, 3 o'clock. She set the tea down. Tell him I will give him 15 minutes. Junho walked into her office at 3 o'clock with the carefully measured pace of a man who had spent 4 days realizing that everything he had once thought was a wall had only ever been a door he had refused to look at. He was thinner. He had not slept. His suit was still cut by the same tailor, but the man inside it was not the man who had stood on the stage at the Hua Jin. Seo Yan did not stand up when he entered. She gestured to the chair across from her. He sat. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. You knew, he said finally. Yes. For how long? Long enough. How long, Seo Yan? She considered the question. She decided, after a beat, that he had earned the answer. 3 years. He closed his eyes. From the beginning. Almost. Not the first month. By the second month, I understood what your mother was. By the fourth, I understood what you were going to be. And you stayed. I stayed. Why? Because I had nowhere else to go that mattered. Because I had grown up poor, and I had grown up smart, and I had been taught, from the time I was a child, that when you find yourself in a room full of people who have underestimated you, the worst thing you can do is leave. The best thing you can do is learn the room. You learned it. I learned it. He opened his eyes. They were wet, although he did not let the tears fall. She did not feel anything in particular about that. The part of her that would have once felt something had been the part of her that died in the rain on the night his mother, 3 years ago, before any of this began, had walked into the dining room and asked, in front of every senior member of the family, whether Seo Yan's mother had ever owned a pair of leather shoes. Junho had laughed that night, not loudly, not cruelly, but he had laughed. That laugh had cost him everything. Why didn't you destroy me completely? He asked. She tilted her head slightly. I did. You left me alive. That is not the same thing. He looked down at his hands. What do you want from me now? Nothing. Nothing? Nothing, Junho. That is the entire point. There is nothing left between us that requires you to give me anything. The empire is mine. The name is mine. I kept it on purpose. Your mother is being managed by a legal process I do not need to control. You are being managed by a prosecutor I do not need to influence. Every door in your life that closes from now on will close because of what you did, not because of what I am still doing. Then why did you agree to see me? Because you asked. He looked up. That's the only reason? That is the only reason that mattered enough to say yes. He was quiet for a long time. The light through the windows had begun to turn the color of late afternoon, the kind of soft gold that made everything in Seoul look briefly forgivable. Seoyeon. Yes. On the night my mother, the dinner, the shoes. I remember. I have thought about that night every day for 3 years. I know. I watched you think about it. Why didn't you tell me you knew? Because the man who could have heard it would not have laughed in the first place. By the time I understood that, there was no version of telling you that would have changed anything. So I did the only thing left to do. I built a version of the world in which it didn't matter whether you ever heard it from me. He nodded slowly. Was there ever, he said, a moment, a single moment, when you considered staying? She thought about it. Honestly, she owed him at least that. Yes. When? On a Tuesday, 8 months ago. You came home early. You sat in the kitchen with me and you ate the soup I had made, and you didn't talk about your mother for 40 minutes. You asked me about a book I was reading. You asked the right questions. For 40 minutes that night, Junho, you were the man I had married. And then your phone rang, and you took the call, and when you came back to the table, you were the other one again? He put his hands on the edge of the desk. I'm sorry. I know. That is not enough. No, it isn't. Will it ever be? She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the rain that had never actually fallen on her. About the night 3 years ago, when she had stood in the marble foyer of the Kang mansion, expecting her husband to defend her, and he had instead chosen the silence that had become the architecture of her entire next life. Junho, she said, I do not know if I will ever forgive you. I am not lying to you. I am telling you the truth because the truth is the only thing left between us that has any value. Maybe one day, when your name has stopped meaning what it means now, when your mother has stopped existing in the world the way she existed in our marriage, when you have become someone who does not require me to be smaller in order for you to feel large, maybe then we will sit across from each other and find out. And until then, you will live the life you built, and I will live the life I built, and we will not pretend that those two lives are the same one. He stood up slowly. He looked at her for a long moment. He did not ask for anything else. He had learned finally that there was nothing left to ask for that was his to ask for. He walked to the door. Seoyeon. Yes. Thank you for the 15 minutes. It was 11. He almost smiled. He left. The pearl bracelet arrived by courier the following morning. It was placed on Seoyeon's desk by an assistant who did not know what it was, and she looked at it for a long time before she touched it. It was beautiful. It was also, she realized, no longer important. The promise it had once represented, the promise of belonging in a family that had been designed to exclude her, was a promise she no longer needed kept. She had built a room of her own. The bracelet was a souvenir from a war, not a trophy from a marriage. She put it in a velvet box. She had her assistant deliver it to the National Museum, with a note that it was being donated anonymously in honor of every woman in the country whose name had been left off of the program at her own engagement. The story made the papers within 48 hours. The anonymity did not last. It never does. 3 weeks later, Yoon Do-jin came to her office without an appointment. He stood in front of her desk. He did not sit down. He did not bring a folder. Mrs. Kang? Yes. I owe you an answer. To what? To a question you have not yet asked me. She set her pen down. Go on. When you asked me, 4 weeks ago, why I waited for you, I told you that I made my decision when I learned what you had been reading. That was true, but it was not the complete answer. What is the complete answer? He was quiet for a long moment. He looked briefly at the window. Then he looked back at her. I waited for you, Mrs. Kang, because the photograph in Incheon was not the only one. There was a second one, 6 months later. You were at a hospital in Busan. You had taken the train alone. You were carrying a small bouquet of white chrysanthemums. You went into the cardiac wing on the 3rd floor, and you visited a woman I did not recognize, and you sat with her for 92 minutes, and when you left, you cried in the train station for exactly 4 minutes before you composed yourself and went back to Seoul. How do you... The woman was the wife of the man your husband's family had killed 11 years earlier. She was my mother. Seo-yeon's hand stopped moving on the desk. You had no reason to visit her, he continued. She had no connection to your life. She was a name in a file you should not have been able to access. You went anyway. You sat with her. You did not tell her who you were. You did not tell her why you had come. You only sat with her, and you brought her flowers, and you listened to her talk about a husband who had been dead for over a decade. I asked her, 3 months later, who the woman in the green coat had been. She said she did not know. She said only that the woman had been kind and had stayed longer than anyone else had stayed in years. He paused. That was the moment, Mrs. Kang. That was when I decided, not when I learned what you had been reading, not when I learned what you had been planning, when I learned that you had taken a train, alone, to sit with a stranger for 92 minutes, because you had read a file and you had understood, in a way that no one else in that family had ever bothered to understand, what it cost. The office was very quiet. I waited for you, Yoon Do-jin said, because I was raised by a woman who had been left alone for 11 years, and the only person who had ever come to sit with her was the wife of the man who should have been her enemy. I needed to know who that woman was, and then I needed to wait until she was ready to be known. Seo-yeon did not speak for a long time. When she did, her voice was steadier than she expected. Mr. Yoon. Yes. Sit down. He sat. I am not going to give you an answer today. I did not come for one. I know. She looked at him across the desk. But the next time you can come without a folder. He looked at her for a long moment. I would like that, Mrs. Kang. Stop calling me that. What would you prefer? She thought about it. My name? Seo-yeon. Yes. He stood up. He walked to the door. He paused at the frame, and for the first time in their entire association, he turned around fully before he left. Seo-yeon. Yes. Thank you for the chrysanthemums. He closed the door behind him gently. Outside, the Han River was the color of late afternoon. That soft gold that made everything in Seoul look briefly forgivable. Seo-yeon sat in her office for a long time, watching the light change. There was no champagne. There was no triumph. There was only the quiet, almost private recognition of a woman who had walked into a ballroom 3 years ago, expecting to become a wife, and who had walked out of one 3 weeks ago, having become, instead, an architect. She picked up the cup of barley tea. It had gone cold. She drank it anyway. Then she opened the folder on her desk, picked up her pen, and began to build the next room.